So today we are going to be talking about ensuring laboratory safety, biosafety and equipment management. I welcome you to today's topic. We are gradually coming to the end of this series of webinar. I think we have 2 more weeks left and we'll wrap up. So our deliverables today, at the end of this session, we should be able to describe the key principles of lab safety and biosafety, with particular reference to WHO and CDC guidelines. We'll also look at how to apply biosafety practices appropriate for various risk groups and containment levels in routine lab operations. We'll talk about best practices for equipment maintenance, calibration and validation. We'll talk about understanding of sustainable lab practices, and then how it integrates safety, biosafety, and equipment management into a cohesive QMS framework. So before we delve in fully into the modules today, we will run our usual pre-course assessments just for us to give us a head start. IT, please, can you run the polls so that people can take the polls and we'll move on. So you're going to choose just one correct answer for each question. A very straightforward questions. Just choose one answer for each question. We are waiting for the IT personnel to run the polls so that you can select your answers and we'll move ahead. So the questions, the first one is talking about who is at a high occupational risk of infection from bloodborne pathogens, and concerning safety in the lab, and then what a green lab is. We hope to cover all this in the course of this session. So when we talk about safety in the laboratory, we are referring to the set of practices, procedures, guidelines designated to ensure the well-being of personnel who work in the laboratory, to mitigate any untoward occurrences, harms that may come waiting to happen to personnel who work in the laboratory. And you will agree with me that this assurance of lab safety is critical to minimizing the risk of exposure to these pathogens in the laboratory. And for this, the WHO and even the CDC emphasize the importance of a robust safety program in all laboratories. And of course, expectedly, it is equally a high priority for CAP. And why is it important? Why is lab safety important? Why are we discussing it? Why are we taking a whole session to discuss lab safety? It is important to protect the lives of the employees and even of the patients. It is important to protect the equipment, because you don't want to buy equipment today and you're talking about replacing it tomorrow. Your resources, you need to maximize your resources. You need to protect even the facility. And of course, importantly, you even also need to protect the environment. So lab safety is critical to our QMS, and we need to take it seriously. Now, to emphasize the importance of this lab safety, let's talk about the lab hazards. Because for us who are there, for us who work there, you find out that a lot of times we kind of, we are not we don't take it too serious, or we don't take it as serious as it should be, possibly because we've worked there for a long time. Somebody might have worked there for 10, 15, 20 years, and maybe luckily he hasn't had any injury, he hasn't been exposed to any lab hazard. And then, or you haven't seen somebody who has had that, okay? And so you're like, why do we talk about it? You kind of play it down, okay? But the fact that you've not experienced it, you've not seen someone who has experienced it, does not make it less harmful, does not make it less hazardous. So we need to remind ourselves, what are these hazards and why are they a cause for concern? They are potentially harmful phenomena, substance, human activity, or condition that has the potential to result in loss of life. It can actually result in the loss of life. It can cause injuries, of course, diseases. We know those ones very well. Property damage, loss of livelihood, services, social and economic upheaval, and even can result to harm to the environment. Now, this is the WHO definition of hazards. And in the laboratory, hazards are categorized into biological, chemical, physical, or radioactive hazards for our colleagues who use radioactive substances. And it has been reported that healthcare workers are at higher risk of infections from bloodborne pathogens than the general population. So the fact that you work in the hospital, you are at a higher risk of infection than the man who is sitting calmly in his farm, who is sitting in his village, who is selling commodities in the market, who is working in the bank. And, so the fact that you are working in a hospital puts you at a higher risk of infection, especially from bloodborne pathogens. And the people who are most at risk amongst those who work in that hospital are those individuals who have exposure to blood and body fluids. And you will agree with me that we, the people who work in the laboratory, fall under this category. You are almost exposed on a daily basis to blood and body fluids, okay? And laboratories handle a wide variety of materials and a large number of potentially dangerous pathogenic agents. Important amongst them, you have hepatitis B, you have hepatitis C, HIV, tuberculosis, salmonella, etc. So in a daily basis, we are exposed to these bloodborne pathogens. And for that reason, we need to be careful in our work. And then we also talk about needle stick injury, also referred to as percutaneous injury. And this is the penetration of skin by needle or other sharp objects. I want to call our attention to this, that when we talk about needle stick injury, it's not only penetration by needle, because a lot of times our mind only goes to needle and we think about people who use needles, who give injections, okay? And then we forget that, yes, not in the lab we use needles, but not all the sections use needles. But then we're also exposed to other sharp objects, which can also cause this needle stick injury. And so when injury is caused by way of penetration of skin, whether it's by needle or other sharp objects, is also referred to as needle stick injury. And that object has to be contaminated with blood, tissue, or other body fluid before the exposure. Now, despite the negative health effects of these needle stick injuries, it is estimated that half of occurrences are not reported. This does not come to us as a surprise. We know that. In our last discussion, we mentioned that things happen in the laboratories, occurrences happen, they are not documented. And because they are not documented, they are not reported. Okay? Now, WHO in 2007 estimated an annual global NSIs, needle stick injuries, at 2 million per year. 2 million per year. You can imagine that. And another investigation even estimated it to be at 3.5 million injuries yearly, just in a year, 3.5 million. And we are saying that this is still underreported. And in China, about 1 million have been reported every year, in which one healthcare worker was exposed to these needle stick injuries every 30 seconds. Can imagine the intensity of this. So it's worthy of note that these estimates are only the reported cases, and about 40 to 70% of unreported cases happen where? You can imagine, your guess is as good as mine, that they happen in developing countries. A lot of things happen and they go unreported and they are not documented. Okay. So, concerning health hazard, some concerning chemical hazards, which is another category of hazards in the laboratory. A study which was done in Lebanon reported that the main cause of accidents in the lab was the exposure to chemicals. 73.7% of accidents in the lab was caused by chemicals, and more specifically by inhalation of these chemicals. So the problem is not only the biological hazards, the chemical hazards equally cause a huge chunk of the problem. Okay. Okay, so that is safety. Those are the hazards. And when we come to safety, nobody takes a back seat. Safety is everyone's business. Nobody takes a back seat. Because somebody will say, okay, we have a safety officer. Safety officer, it's your work. It's your responsibility. Okay, no. But safety is for everybody. Everybody is called to take action. Now, for the safety officer or the quality manager, because in some laboratories, you find out that the quality manager can double as a safety officer, especially in small laboratories, okay? So for the person who is responsible for handling safety, the office of the safety officer, is necessary to develop your safety manual. And this safety manual contains a complete and thorough description of basic safety rules, which ensures that personnel are trained in their specific duties. And this training, they are trained concerning safety in the duties which they currently do, in the activities which currently occur in the laboratories, and also when you introduce new tests, new activities into the laboratory, you need to explore around the safety concerns of that new activity which you are introducing. And after exploration, you are expected to train the staff about those new activities for them to be aware of safety concerns about the new activities which you are introducing into the laboratory. It's also necessary to know the basics of safety and biosafety management issues when working with chemicals and pathogens of moderate and low level of risk. It is also necessary to know how to perform an extensive risk assessment when developing new activities in the lab. I just mentioned that. And also to conduct laboratory safety audits regularly. So those are what we are expected of the safety officer. On the other hand, for every other staff working in the lab, it is important that everyone knows basic safety rules and processes. And apart from being aware, you need to understand the basics of the safety and biosafety management issues whenever you're working with toxic chemicals, biological samples, physical hazards, and even when you're interacting with patients. The maxim is safety first. You must put everyone's safety first before any other thing, okay? So based on that, based on all those essentials, we have said the safety officer or the quality manager is expected to develop a safety manual. So that manual is provided to guide staff, to guide laboratory staff when it comes to safety. And so it should provide written procedures for safety and biosafety. The program, now, so that manual is a part of the safety management program. So the program includes one, that safety manual. Apart from that manual, it also includes organizing safety training and exercises which teach staff to be aware of potential hazards and how to apply safety practices and techniques. That program should also include setting up a process to conduct risk assessments, both initial risk assessments as well as ongoing lab safety audits. Of course, we have said it is the safety officer or the lab manager that is responsible for developing this safety management program. And when you're organizing that safety training, there are things that are expected that within that training. It is expected that you give information about universal precautions. Every staff in the lab must be familiar with universal precautions. IPC, infection prevention and control, should be part of that training. Everybody should be aware of the basic tenets of IPC. Chemical and radiation safety, very important. We have just mentioned the chemical hazards that usually occur in the laboratory. So it is very important to cover chemical safety, and for those who use radioactive materials, it's equally important to cover radiation safety. And every staff in the laboratory should know how to use PPE, the personal protective equipment. Everybody should know how to use it. When it comes to disposal, especially for the lab attendants, the cleaners, they should be specifically trained on disposal. But not only that, not only the cleaners, every other personnel in the lab, because waste disposal starts from segregation. So you should be able to know where to drop waste before even the lab attendants, the cleaners begin to dispose. So everybody should be aware of disposal of waste and how to do that properly. And very importantly too, every lab personnel should know what to do in case of emergencies. So you can see that when it comes to safety, nobody takes a backseat. Everybody takes action, and safety is everybody's business. So the equipment, what are the general safety equipments that are used in the laboratory? Now, it is the safety officer's responsibility to ensure that there is an adequate supply of appropriate equipment, such as the PPE. There should be an appropriate supply, an adequate supply of PPE. Fire extinguishers and fire blankets should be readily available. And not just being available, they have to be checked regularly to know when it expires and when it is not properly placed. Appropriate storage and cabinets for flammable and toxic chemicals. Very important to mitigate chemical hazards. Then eye washers and emergency shower. This is equally very important, especially for chemicals, chemical hazards. Waste disposal supplies and equipment should also be adequate. Then first aid equipment. So all these are essential for every laboratory to have as safety equipment. You know, we keep one very general thing about safety is that we keep talking about it. When you ask anybody what are safety equipment, people rattle it. But the problem begins when you now visit a lab and you say, please, can I see your first aid equipment, your first aid box? Problem starts. The lab might have it, but it might be somewhere covered with layers of dust. Nobody has checked it in the past 2-3 years. Okay? All these things, eye washers, all these things we are talking about, We may know them, but how do we implement them? How often do we check them? Okay, so what are the standard safety practices in the laboratory, which everybody should be aware of? The lab is not a thoroughfare. It is not an all-commerce business. So only authorized personnel are allowed to have access to the lab. Hand washing, hand hygiene is very important, especially for lab personnel. After you handle infectious or hazardous materials, for those who work with animals, when you handle animals, after removing your gloves, because there is this myth that your gloves, once you wear your gloves, then you may not need to wash hands again. That is incorrect. After you remove your gloves, you are expected to wash your hands. Before you leave the lab, you're expected to wash your hands. So hand hygiene is very important as a safety practice in the lab. Of course, you're not allowed to eat, drink, smoke, handle contact lenses, applying cosmetics in work areas. These are prohibited. Prohibited, not allowed. Of course, mouth pipetting, the sermon has been going on for as long as I can remember. And I believe and I hope that nobody indulges in mouth pipetting anymore. So that one too is prohibited. Then you use techniques that minimize aerosol or splash production when performing procedures. And here it is recommended that if you're performing those procedures, they should be safely performed using your biosafety cabinets. Okay, on this other side, you can see these are signs for no food. Dress appropriately, wear appropriate equipment at all times. Wear your protective eyewear, gloves, and a lab coat. Tie back long hair. Tie back long hair. For people who work in the laboratories, all these modern styles of hair, especially for the ladies, that drop to that are made for them to be so long and are dropping, they are not good for you. It is against the safety practices in the laboratory. So if you have that as, yes, you can do it, but where you're coming to work, it is appropriate that you tie it back. You pack the hair back so that you don't, the hair is not touching the lab bench, is not touching anywhere and taking and getting contaminated. Okay, so if you have that, better if you don't have that long hair, but if you have it, you need to pack it up and tie it so that it doesn't have contact with any other thing. Be aware of your surroundings. Take extra caution when handling hazardous materials. Be sure to turn off equipment when not in use. Handle glassware carefully. Keep a clean workspace. Proper supervision, clean up. Okay? Of course, you are expected to use PPE whenever you're working in the laboratory. They're expected to use PPE. Sandals and open-toe shoes are prohibited in work areas. I remember quite vividly, these were part of the instructions we were in as young professionals coming into the lab for the first time. We were strictly told sandals, open-toe shoes are prohibited. I hope our younger ones are still keeping to this. Preventing inhalation exposure by using chemical fume hoods and other containment devices for vapors, gases, aerosols, fumes, dusts, or powders. Then you store your chemicals according to recognized compatibilities. And here, the safety data sheets are very important. They are critical when handling chemicals in the laboratory. So these safety data sheets should be studied for any personnel handling chemicals, whether you're working with them, whether you're storing it, whether you're a store officer or you're on the bench handling. For any chemical that you're going to handle, it is appropriate that you study the safety data sheets for that chemical. Now, these safety data sheets are meant to come from the manufacturers of those chemicals to tell you what is expected of you when handling that chemical, to tell you the hazardous level of that chemical. But even if you don't have it supplied from the manufacturer, it is encouraged, you are encouraged to go online and get the safety data sheet for whichever chemical you're working on. Any chemical at all that is hazardous, you are going to find the safety data sheet online. So just a little more work on your own part, go online and check for the safety data sheet, because it is important that you study it before you handle these hazardous chemicals in the laboratory. It's critical that you decontaminate your work surfaces daily. Very important, very important. Daily decontamination of work surfaces. You're also expected to decontaminate all cultures, stocks, and other wastes before disposal. You can do that via autoclaving. Some wastes are decontaminated via autoclaving, some via chemical disinfection, some by incineration or other approved method. So I pulled up this, of course, from the internet, online, safety data sheet. The first one is for hydrogen sulfide. So just look below it. You can see section 2, talking about the hazards identification. So it gives you the status, gives you the classification of the substance. It says flammable gases, category 1. Flammable gases, category. So these categories are designated by the GHS, the Global Harmonized System. So category 1, it tells you it's a flammable gas. That is a gas under pressure. Then you can see acute toxicity, inhalation in brackets, category 2. Okay, so what this means, category 1 is actually the highest level of hazard within any specified hazard class. Then category 2 represents a lower but still significant level of hazard. So it's telling you now that hydrogen sulfide is a flammable gas and it can cause acute toxicity by inhalation. So this tells you that if you have to handle this chemical, you will need to handle it in a fume cupboard. Okay. Then what is the specific target organ toxicity? The respiratory tract irritation. And it also causes aquatic hazard. What this points to is that it's for disposal. So if you're going to dispose this chemical, you should be aware that it causes aquatic hazard. So your disposal method should not allow this chemical to leak into water bodies. Okay, then you have the pictograms, the GHS hazard pictograms. You can see here, flammable. This is flammable. This sign is saying gas under pressure. This is toxicity, acute toxicity, that too. And this is aquatic hazard, harmful to aquatic life. So the signal word is danger. It now says hazard statements, extremely flammable gas, may form explosive mixtures with air, contains gas under pressure, may explode if heated, may cause frostbite, fatal if inhaled, extended exposure to gas reduces the ability to smell sulfides, may cause respiratory irritation, very toxic to aquatic life. So this has given you, in a nutshell, the hazard information about this chemical, hydrogen sulfide. Then this one, this is ethanol. The same thing here, just come down, look at the hazard identification. Classification of substance is a flammable liquid. Okay. Hazard class and category code, serious eye irritation. Serious eye irritation, category 2. Indication of danger and R phrases, highly flammable, R11. The R phrase simply means risk phrases, even though it's been, um, 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 it's is going out of use now. That's R phrases. The GHS, they're no more making so much use of the R phrases, but it just means the risk phrases. Okay. And these risk phrases, they have up to R from R1 to about R68, so many of them. But the important thing is that the safety data sheet would tell you what each R category means. Like this one now is R11. It is highly inflammable. Okay. If you R10 is flammable. R12 is extremely flammable. But you don't need to commit all that to memory because the safety data sheet is going to give you all the information you need. So for ethanol, I know quite a number of us might work with ethanol, might be working with ethanol. You need to know it's a flammable liquid. It can cause eye irritation. Okay, it's highly flammable. This is methanol. Methanol. Okay, this one is more legible. The first thing you see here is danger. Danger. Highly flammable liquid and vapor. Toxic if swallowed. Toxic in contact with skin. Toxic if inhaled. Causes damage to organs. So it tells you the methanol is a dangerous chemical. If you come to this one on the left, look at the hazards identification down here. I know it's a bit small, but I'll read it out. It's emergency overview. It says this product is a clear, volatile, flammable liquid. Has a slight alcoholic odor. Highly flammable. Vapors may form explosive mixtures with air. The product causes irritation of eyes, skin, and mucous membranes. Toxic by inhalation. In contact with skin and if swallowed. Methanol can cause blindness, causes headache, drowsiness, or other effects to the central nervous system. Do not allow product to contact skin, eyes, and clothing. Do not breathe vapors. So you can see that safety data sheet is critical whenever you're working with any chemicals. So let's move ahead. Fire drills, evacuation procedures. We are still talking about safety in the laboratories, and fire drills are equally essential. It's an essential part of laboratory safety, and they must be organized at least once a year. At least once a year. That is the minimum where that you should drill in your setting, okay, and evacuation procedures. So it's an occasion for the safety officer to emphasize risk to laboratory staff and to review with them the specific procedures for evacuation, for handling of incidents, and basic security precautions. So it enhances emergency preparedness because you're not going to wait until something happens, then everybody's running helter-skelter before you're now shouting instructions to people. People may not even be in the state of mind to hear you. So it's always better for you to prepare everybody in the lab in case of anything, in case of any fire. This fire alarm might sound. If you don't have fire alarm, you'll have a whistle. Improvise with a whistle, improvise with anything. Once you hear this, once you hear that, drop everything you're doing, stop every activity, don't panic, move towards this exit routes. Everybody should know about the exit routes in the laboratory. Okay? And then there should be a muster point. So people don't run away and run and go home, because you need to have a head count after you have evacuated people to know if anybody is remaining inside the building. So it's very important that staff know exactly what is expected of them in cases of emergency. It also helps them to reduce panic and confusion, because if they don't know, if anything happens, you see people running helter-skelter. Some people may be running right, people are running left, and even worsening the situation in the whole process. It's important to protect lives and property to ensure regulatory compliance, and it reinforces safety culture. Okay, sorry. So in the event of a fire drill, the fire alarm sounds. So if you have a fire alarm in your setting, you regularly check it. This is also something important. You regularly check it, and this fire drill will give you an opportunity to check that your fire alarm is sounding. Okay? And if you don't have, you improvise. The important thing is that everybody in the lab knows what your fire alarm is like, whether it's a whistle, whether it's a gong, whether it's proper alarm, whatever it is. Then when that sounds, everyone is expected to stop all activity, no panicking, listen to instructions. Then you proceed along planned evacuation route in an orderly manner. Orderly manner is important to avoid stampede, which will even worsen the whole thing. Okay? And then everybody should know a designated muster point. You exit the premises to assembly area. Everybody should know that, and everybody assembles that for a head count, and then awaiting further instructions before any other thing. Okay? So let's go over to waste management. Let's go back to waste management. This also is a critical issue, the lab waste management. And I know that we are familiar with color coding in the laboratories. So it is expected that we dispose of waste using the color code, and special attention is given to potentially harmful contaminated waste like sharps, needles, or broken glassware. So the sharps containers must be available and easily accessible. Very important, because somebody may be working, if the sharps containers is not easily accessible, he or she might drop that sharps in an appropriate container, an inappropriate container, which is bad. Okay, so those sharps containers must be available and they must be easily accessible. And all potentially harmful and dangerous materials must be treated in an appropriate way before disposal. The consequences. So if you don't do what is expected of you concerning waste management, there are consequences. It can harm people, it can harm your colleagues, even you, your colleagues, patients, people who are collecting those wastes, can cause harm to them. Health risks, biological risks, it can cause pulmonary health, hepatic risk, chemical risk, toxic risk, hazardous, corrosives, okay? They pose all sorts of risk to people around. Combustion of plastic, metal toxicity, because these things can leak into the surrounding water bodies, can harm aquatic life, and they could even find their way into the human food supply chain. So these are consequences of improper disposal of biochemical waste, and should call us to a good attention that waste management is important in the laboratory specifically, and even in the hospital as a whole. Okay. Now, this is color coding, which we are very much aware of. I know that most of us are familiar with the red, yellow, and the black buckets, and then the sharps container, which is usually white. Okay. So what may be not so familiar here is the blue bucket and the green bucket. So, but generally it's classified in, you have the non-infectious waste and infectious waste. So the non-infectious can also be called general waste, non-infectious. So those ones go into the black bucket. Then the infectious waste go into the highly infectious, the red less highly go into the yellow. The blue one is for glasswares like injection ampoules, vials, metallic implants. They are still in infectious, but they are sharps. So that is what the blue bucket is about. Then the green here, it says food waste, that the biodegradable waste can go into the green. But now, sometimes you see the green mask marked as recyclable waste, because we're going to talk about recycling. So if you look at this next slide, you see the green bag here being captioned recyclable waste. Okay, so that is just basically the color coding for waste management. You have our blue, red, black, yellow, green, and then the white sharps box. Okay, so we said that it was necessary to conduct safety audits. So the lab manager with the safety officer should make it a point of duty to regularly conduct safety audits. And these are systematic evaluations of workplace practices, equipment, and procedures to ensure compliance with safety standards and identify areas for improvement. And why it's important for them to conduct safety audits to ensure compliance, to identify hazards, identify accidents waiting to happen. So it detects potential risks like chemical exposure, equipment malfunction, inadequate waste disposal. So it's when you go around, when you conduct these audits, that you see what is going wrong, and you should be able to now implement corrective actions, preventing accidents and incidents. So it enables proactive corrective action before accidents occur. And of course, it's work in progress. The improvement, continuous improvement, is work in progress. So when you have these audits, identify these accidents waiting to happen, put in place corrective measures, and then continue improving your quality. And then documenting, another importance is documenting safety performance. So it provides evidence of due diligence for inspections, for accreditation, for audits. So it's very important that a laboratory puts in place these safety audits. Okay. Now, I said, apart from WHO, CDC, lab safety is a high priority for CAP. It's high priority for CAP. So it's evidenced in the CAP accreditation checklist. Okay, so if you look into the CAP accreditation checklist, they devoted a whole section to laboratory safety. That is to show you how important it is for them, for laboratories to maintain a safe environment. And that's their accreditation checklist is quite a heavy document with more than 100 pages. So the aim is not to bring out everything there, but I just selected just few points from there just to show us just a few of their points when they are looking at safety in the laboratory. So the section 73300 requires that there are records for the training of all personnel in safety policy and procedures. Remember that this is their checklist, their accreditation checklist. So this is what they are looking out for. They are looking for evidence. Show us the evidence that you trained your staff in safety policies and procedures. 74200 requires that personnel are instructed in the proper use of personal protective clothing, and records are retained. There must be documentation. 74700 requires that personnel reasonably expected to have direct contact with blood and other potentially infectious materials are identified and offered hepatitis B vaccinations free of charge. Now, this is their own expectation. You identify those people and you offer them the vaccination free of charge. This is key. This is very important. Of course, we saw the statistics of hepatitis B infections, hepatitis C, HIV, and all the others. Okay, now I remember that in my own setting, in my own facility, about 34 years ago, the administration was able to mount this hepatitis B screening and vaccination program for staff. But then the administration, they were only able to fund the screening. Okay, because of course, before you take the vaccinations, you are screened first. So they were only able to fund the screening, and for the vaccinations, staff were expected to pay a token for it. Okay, but it is essential if a setup, a facility is able to cater for the two, it's able to offer both the screening and the vaccinations free of charge. It's highly recommended because it's very important that staff who are directly in contact with blood and other infectious materials are vaccinated against hepatitis B. Okay, and this vaccination, there's of course, there's no way anybody will know that you're vaccinated apart from having your card in your file. That is your vaccination card. You make a copy of it and you put in your personal file. That is the only way. That is when we talk about this documentation. That is the only way anybody will know that you have been vaccinated against hepatitis B or against any other thing for that matter. And then personnel who decline this vaccine will need to sign a declination form. Okay, because ethically, anybody can refuse medical approach. So if a particular personnel declines getting the vaccinations, you don't just say, okay, it's within your right. No, but the person will have to sign a declination form, which will be documented in the person's personal file. Section 75-400 requires that new personnel are trained on fire safety and fire safety review conducted at least annually. And so this section actually requires that it forms a part of your orientation program for your new personnel. Okay, it forms a part of your orientation program. Then 7600 requires that the lab should have a chemical hygiene plan, which defines the safety policies and procedures for chemicals used in the laboratory. 7600 personnel should have access to all of the following. They should have access to your safety data sheets. Just note that safety data sheets were formerly called material safety data sheets, but currently it's now called just safety data sheets. So personnel should have access to that, especially those who come in contact with these chemicals, who work with these chemicals, so they know they have adequate information before they begin to handle these chemicals. And personnel should equally have access to your chemical hygiene plan. Okay. 77110 requires that there is an up-to-date radiation safety manual. So for laboratories using radioactive materials, just like you have safety manual, you also need to have your radiation safety manual, which includes sections on the contamination and radioactive waste. 77400 requires that the lab has adequate plumbed or self-contained emergency eye wash facilities in every area where exposure to the eye may occur. eye wash facilities. So if you look at the right part, you will see the emergency eye wash. Typically, you can see somebody bending down to have water splash into his eyes. So typically, the eye wash, the water from the eye wash jets upwards, as opposed to what you have in your regular taps. Okay, so eye wash, the water jets upwards. But I know that in our own setting, many of us may not have this, we don't have this standard eye wash. So a lot of times we use the eye wash bottles.
So
This form that you see down here. This is what is mainly available in most of our laboratory settings. Okay, but it's important to have eye wash stations, and staff should be able to know in order to have immediate access to eye wash stations in case of any emergency. Okay, so these are general signs, general symbols for lab safety, quite a number of them. I know many of us are familiar with a number of them, but it's good for us to know all these safety symbols. Which one is high voltage, where lab coat is required, no electronics, glassware hazard. Each one is explosive material, health hazard, non-ionizing, ionizing material, poison. Okay, protective clothing required. Then these ones too. Okay, so when we talking about health hazard, that's might be a carcinogen, might be mutagenic, reproductive toxicity, respiratory sensitizer, target organ toxicity, aspiration toxicity. This signifies flame, flammable, self-heating, self-reactives. Exclamation mark signifies irritant, skin sensitizer, telling you that the product is acutely toxic, harmful, respiratory tract irritants, hazardous to ozone layer. Okay, the gas cylinder sign tells you that gases here are under pressure, so they may explode when heated. This is corrosion. Skin corrosion can cause corrosion to the skin, causes eye damage, corrosive to metals. Exploding bomb signifies explosives, self-reactives, organic peroxides, flame over circle, oxidizers, environment, aquatic toxicity. Then the skull and crossbones signifies acute toxicity. These are also, we have covered many of them here. We have covered many of them. Compressed gases, harmful. We have covered many of them. Okay, so these are the general lab safety symbols which we should be familiar with. Okay, so let's move on to the second part of this session, talking about equipment maintenance, calibration, and validation. So these are critical steps. We all know that. Anybody who is working with equipment will know that you just need to maintain your equipment. Whether it's something in your house, you need to without maintenance, that thing will not last long. So equipment maintenance is key in ensuring optical performance and reliability in the laboratory. So both in the short term and in long term, they help to ensure accuracy and reliability of the results you are generating from your laboratory. And not only that, they prolong the life of your equipment and of your facilities, and even the reliability, promote the reliability and productivity of the research carried out in your laboratories. And when you stick to regular equipment maintenance, it can help you to avoid violating regulations and violating standards. When you're doing the correct thing, the right thing, as and at when due, you will most likely not violate any regulations and standards. Okay. So our ISO 1518-2022 section 645 has provisions for equipment maintenance. And it says that the lab shall have preventive maintenance programs based on manufacturer's instructions, and that the equipment shall be maintained in a safe working condition and working order. This includes electrical safety, emergency stop devices, safe handling, disposal of hazardous materials by authorized personnel. And if any equipment is malfunctioning, you clearly mark that equipment out of service. It should be marked, because somebody working there, you may know that this equipment is malfunctioning. If it's not clearly marked, another person may come and put it on and attempt to use it and may cause problems. So any equipment in the laboratory, anybody that enters, any external agent, any external personnel that enters the staff should be able to know the functional equipment and non-functional equipment. So you need to mark any non-functional equipment out of service. And before you carry out any major maintenance on your equipment, it is recommended that you first decontaminate that equipment, because the person coming in might have to dismantle some of them and may come in contact with hazardous material. So, the engineer coming is not a lab personnel, may not know. So you, who is a lab personnel who works with that equipment, you need to decontaminate before servicing or repairing that equipment. And you also need to provide appropriate PPE for the engineer who is coming to service your equipment. Now, for this maintenance, it was part of what we talked about documentation. So for every equipment in the lab, we are familiar with our equipment book of life, our equipment logbook, okay? There are records that must be maintained for every equipment in your laboratory. Now, first is identification and procurement. You need to state the manufacturer and supplier details. Each equipment should have a unique identifier, including the software and firmware versions. The condition upon receipt. Did you buy it? Was it a new equipment when you got it? Was it used? Was it refurbished? You need to put it there. When did you receive it? Because you might receive an equipment today and it might take you like 5 months before you put it into use. So you document the day of receipt and you document the day you started making use of that equipment. During installation and verification, results of the acceptance testing and conformance with specified criteria should be documented. The current physical location of that equipment should be documented. Manufacturer's instructions and user manuals, all of them should be part of your equipment records. Preventive and corrective maintenance records should be there. So any maintenance activity performed, whether it was by the person working on the equipment, by the lab personnel, or whether you invited an external engineer to come and service the equipment, any activity performed needs to be documented. Any damage, malfunction, modification, repairs should be documented. Calibration reports, verification reports, dates, times, results, standards, personnel who did that calibration should be recorded. Then we've talked about the status of the equipment. Is it in service? Is it out of service? Is it quarantined? Is it obsolete? The status of that equipment should be indicated, okay? And you document any major updates, relocations, or decommissioning. So the steps in equipment maintenance. So having had your record in place, what are the steps? It is very important to maintain and establish and maintain a schedule for maintenance. Create a routine maintenance plan. And this maintenance plan may be based on manufacturer recommendations. Okay, the manufacturer can say, can recommend that you carry out maintenance services maybe once in every 6 months or whatever. That is manufacturer recommendations. Also, your schedule, your maintenance schedule can also depend on your usage, okay? Because an equipment which runs, let's say 10 samples in a day, you can't compare that with an equipment that runs like 50 or more samples in a day. Obviously, the heavier the load the equipment carries, the regular the maintenance should be, okay? And this your maintenance plan should include regular inspection, cleaning, and servicing, okay? We've mentioned it before that the maintenance plan is not only about when you invite an external engineer to come, that is included. But in addition to that, the lab personnel who handles that machine, there are some daily maintenance things that he does on a regular basis, like cleaning, minor servicing, and all that. Okay? So all those should be done routinely. Some are done daily, then some are done at irregular routine. So you need to create a routine maintenance plan for an equipment. And everything you do, any maintenance any maintenance activity you do should be documented. We can't say that enough. Accurate logs of all maintenance performed. You should know the date, the task completed, issues identified, who did it. It should be documented. And before anybody starts using any equipment, that person must be trained. You should know how to handle the equipment. You don't just jump into a laboratory and say, okay, even if you have used that equipment, maybe wherever you're coming from, immediately you enter a new establishment. Before you operate a machine, you need to be trained on operating that machine before you go ahead and use it. So ongoing training is important for staff to be competent in using of equipment and in maintaining it, because you use it and you have to maintain the equipment. Then you need to regularly evaluate and revise maintenance protocols, because sometimes the manufacturer can change its software. It can say, you've been using this, we've been updating our software with this, but now we're going to change to this. So you have to update based on whatever the manufacturer's feedback. Okay, whatever the manufacturer is now using, you have to comply with that. So your protocols, revise maintenance protocols based on equipment performance, user feedback, and technological updates. Okay, so what about calibration? This is the process of verifying and adjusting the accuracy of an instrument's measurements by comparing its output to a known reference standard, ensuring that results remain precise and reliable for diagnostic or analytical use. This is calibration. A lot of us are familiar with equipment calibration. So what are the best practices? What are the steps? What are the best practices in equipment calibration? You need to follow an established calibration procedure. You always use manufacturer recommended protocols, okay? It is very important to use traceable calibration standards. Traceable calibration standards. So you ensure that the standards you're using have traceability to recognize national or international references. National or international references, especially the National Institute of Standards and Technology, for reliable and comparable results. It's equally important to calibrate at regular intervals. Okay, so frequency of calibration depends on the equipment type and your usage. Okay, follow the manufacturer's instructions, also the reagent's instructions. And there are instances where you need to calibrate. Okay, Following manufacturer's instructions, manufacturer can say calibrate at these intervals. Then the reagent instructions too, because like for instance, when you have a reagent lot change, you may need to recalibrate. Okay, because even
So
though
now go this second. Yes.
the reagent is coming from the same manufacturer, but the different lot batches might have slightly different characteristics. So you need to recalibrate with each reagent lot change. And also, if your QC results begin to show you systematic bias, when you begin to have trends and all that in your QC results, you know that you will need to recalibrate amongst them other troubleshooting. Okay. And everything you do, of course, you must document. You must maintain comprehensive records to ensure reproducibility and compliance with regulatory standards. So, I know a lot of us do calibration. A lot of us calibrate equipment. But now the catch is, when you calibrate, what do you do at the end of your calibration? This is where this comes handy. What do you document as evidence that you have whether you calibrated or recalibrated an equipment? So your calibration record should include your unique equipment identifier. We should know the equipment you calibrated. We should know the dates when you calibrated, the standard you used for that calibration, the procedure you followed. What did you do? You need to list them unequivocally. This is a procedure you followed for your calibration. And then what were the results of your calibration? All these are essential to ensure reproducibility and compliance. Okay, so now let's just talk about in our poll, our third question was on green lab, a green lab. Our time is fast running, so I hope we'll be able to finish this before our time is over. So I don't know how many of us have had the opportunity of coming in contact with green initiatives. Green initiatives, okay? You know, when you talk about green, everybody thinks about natural habitats, ecological habitats, okay? So these green initiatives, they refer to programs, strategies aimed at promoting environmental friendliness, environmental awareness, sustainability practices, eco-friendly behaviors. These are green initiatives. And green initiatives are not peculiar to laboratories. They cut across all industries, all sectors. Green initiatives cut across, even in your homes, in any other sector of the economy. Green initiatives cut across everywhere. And in fact, I think it's that the laboratories are just beginning to key in. It's kind of a new initiative for laboratories to key in into these green initiatives, because when it first started, it was like probably healthcare was not too fast to join. So other sectors have actually moved ahead of the healthcare sector, and the healthcare sector is just coming in. And in the healthcare sector, the laboratory has a very great role to play in healthcare sector, keying into green initiatives. So what is a green lab? A laboratory which minimizes its environmental impact through sustainable practices, reducing resource use and waste, but maintaining your quality. You will do all that, but you have to maintain quality. So that is a green lab. So what does it aim at? It aims at reducing carbon emissions. We are all familiar with ozone layer degradation, carbon emissions, and all that. So This is what Green Initiative aims at: to reduce carbon emissions and plastic usage, to promote recycling of materials, any recyclable material, promotes it, and reuse consumables where appropriate. So the maxim for Green Initiative is kind of reduce, reuse, and recycle. That is the maxim for Green Initiative. Now, interestingly, Green Initiatives strongly align with our Sustainable Development Goals, which are meant to be achieved by year 2030. So we have just 5 years to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay? So in those 5 years, what can we do? What can be achieved to achieve these SDGs? So Green Initiatives strongly align with Goal 7, affordable and clean energy. It aligns with Goal 12, which is responsible consumption and production. It aligns with Goal 13, climate action. Of course, we are talking about protecting the environment, mitigating climate change. So it strongly aligns with Goal 13. And equally strongly aligns with Goal 15, life on land. We have to protect the land, the plants, okay? Human life, animal life, all that. So these green initiatives strongly align with Sustainable Development Goals. So why the concern? Why are we concerned? I mean, why the concern about laboratories? Why do laboratories have to key in to this green initiative? Why are we talking about laboratories? Why are laboratories key components of the healthcare sector which have to key into this green initiative? Okay, so it has been reported that laboratories have a disproportionately large environmental footprint. Now, if you think about it in your laboratory, you think about all the processes from when a patient reports to your phlebotomy unit. You begin to use resources for taking blood samples. You're already using syringes, you're using cotton wool, you're using gloves, you're putting on, you're using alcohol swabs and all that. You're already using that. You're using paperwork. You're doing paperwork. From there, it now goes to the laboratory. The paperwork continues, the consumables continue, you begin processing, you begin to use the plastics and all that. So every lab test requires significant energy, water, and chemical resources before a single result is generated. And that is why in every lab, all lab workers, when power is down, everybody's shouting. When there's no water, nobody's happy. When reagents are nobody's happy, because you depend heavily on these things. You depend heavily on energy, on water, on chemical resources before you can generate a single lab result. So people have actually sat down to calculate these things, to compare them, and they found out that a lab building can consume up to 10 times more energy than a standard commercial building. Pay attention, it didn't say a residential building, a standard commercial building. And a lab building can consume up to 10 times more energy than a standard commercial building. Okay? And 4 times more water than a standard commercial building. It is not the fault of the laboratories. It is how they work. It is how things have to move for reliable and accurate lab results to be generated. But the extensive use of single-use plastics, of course, hazardous chemicals, and high-energy equipment in the laboratory exacerbates this impact. We have to use your single-use plastics, which you use to collect samples, which you use to separate samples, and all of that. The chemicals you use, high energy equipment, all of that consume a lot of energy, consume a lot of water, and a lot of chemical resources. And these operations, they not only contribute to climate change, air and water pollution, or also biodiversity loss, but they also pose health risks when people handle chemicals in an improper manner. They also pose health risks. We have just talked about the hazards in the laboratories. And when you even look at chemicals, you realize that it's not just about handling chemicals in the laboratories. The production of the chemical in the industry generates a lot of waste. So it's a major polluter, and it's also a resource-intensive sector. So the problem begins from the production, even then from the packaging to the shipping and before it even gets to your laboratory. So the concern is quite legit. Now, according to Healthcare Without Harm, this is a group, the healthcare industry accounts for up to 4.6% of global carbon emissions. And this is what they looked at, and they saw the need to bring the laboratory into this green initiative. That no, we just have to bring the laboratory, they just have to embrace the green initiatives. Okay. So the laboratories don't have a choice here now, because as environmental concerns rise, laboratories now have to begin to seek actively ways to minimize waste, ways to minimize resource consumption, ways to improve their energy and chemical efficiency, and overall, how to reduce their carbon footprint. It is now imperative to do that. So, and to key into these initiatives, people have already started. The laboratories have already started. In Europe, the European Federation of Clinical Chemistry and Laboratory Medicine have already formed a task force. They named this task force EFLM Task Force Green and Sustainable Laboratories. And this task force was founded in 2021. Okay, was founded in 2021. And this was in alignment with the European Green Deal, which was an initiative of European Union to become climate neutral by 2050. So EU have already set a target for themselves that by 2050, they are hoping to become climate neutral. Okay? So, and the goal of this task force, this EU task force, is to promote sustainable practices in clinical laboratories, focusing on carbon footprint reduction, guidance, and greater sustainability. They also offer guidelines and recommendations to decrease energy, water, waste, and chemical use. Not only in Europe, not only for European Union, in 2022, Malaysia recorded a 6.5% increase in their carbon emissions. And they didn't like that. They had an increase up to the tune of 6.5%. And what did they do in response? They implemented green technology policies, including the National Energy Transition Roadmap. And every sector of the nation, every sector of their economy had to key in clinical laboratories inclusive. Okay? Not only that, worldwide, renowned institutions have already keyed in. They have the Harvard University's Sustainable Labs Program, University of California Green Labs Program. People have keyed in. So as it stands now, embracing green initiatives is no longer optional. Rather, it is a scientific, it's an ethical and operational necessity for a sustainable future. So, what are the advocated changes? For us now in the laboratory, what are the advocated changes that we should key into? One is waste reduction, single-use plastics, we are encouraged to move from single-use plastics to reusable glass containers. Move from single-use plastic to reusable glass containers. Why? Because glass is more durable. Glass is more durable than and more recyclable than plastic. And then the second point there is to use recyclable plastics where possible, because plastics have different grades. There are recyclable plastics and non-recyclable plastics. But generally, plastics, when they are being recycled, they often degrade. Degradation occurs more with plastics. And what do they result into? They result into nanoplastics, microplastics, which you know are also harmful to the environment. And a lot of times they leach into the environment, leach into water bodies, contaminate our waters, and sometimes find their movements and they enter into the food supply chain. Okay? You can also minimize paper use by adopting digital documentation and electronic data systems. How do you conserve energy? Energy efficient lighting, your lighting bulbs. You can use energy efficient ones. You can use motion activated systems. You know, there are some lighting systems that when there is nobody inside the room, the light just goes off. If you open the door and enter, the light comes on. If you leave the room, the light goes off. That's the motion activated systems. Energy efficient refrigerators, freezers, air cooling systems. Consider renewable options like solar panels. Invest in energy saving lab equipment like your incubators, ovens. These are newer models, and these newer models are said to have more efficient motors, okay? And they conserve more energy. You also encourage to conserve water. Conserve water. So your pipe, your taps, can install low flow taps such that you can conserve water. And then leakages should be promptly fixed. Optimize water dependent processes to minimize waste. Also recycling, water recycling is also a way of water conservation. Sustainable procurement. Sustainable procurement. Now, we are encouraged to choose vendors who are committed to environmental responsibility. So, you know, European laboratories a lot of them have actually keyed into this, and they were the ones that brought up this, because when they started keying into this green initiative, they realized that they can't do it without having a talk with their vendors, because it is the vendors who supply what they use in the laboratories. So they needed to sit down with the suppliers and discuss about these green initiatives. And then subsequently, they started to choose vendors who are committed to the same green initiatives. So who use minimal packaging, recycled materials, eco-friendly products. Okay. Then sustainable lab design. So to utilize your space, workflow and space utilization to reduce energy demand. You know, for instance, that if you have a laboratory containing 10 rooms, for instance, and another laboratory containing 4 rooms, definitely the energy demand of the 10 rooms will be higher than that of the 4 rooms. So the goal is not to have a massive lab, to have a very big lab. The goal is for utilization of your space and workflow, okay, to reduce energy demand. Because the bigger your lab, the bigger your energy demand, the water demand, and every other thing, okay? So, and also behavior-based changes, like closing fume hood sashes when not in use. They've actually discovered that just the simple practice of closing the fume hood saves up to 30% of energy. So when the fume hood is not in use, just close the sash, because when you close the sash, the equipment goes off. Okay, so just implementing behavior-based changes. And some people have also said just turning down your minus 80 degrees ultra low temperature freezers, turning it down from minus 80 to minus 70 actually saves up to 30% of energy. Yeah, what about operational and cultural shifts? Adopting a lean laboratory approach to minimize unnecessary steps and wastes. I know we have one of the sessions in this webinar was on lean practices. So adopting that is also encouraged. Power down idle equipment. When the equipment is not in use, power it down, put it on sleep or idle. Put off lights, put off air conditioners when not in use. It's still the mantra, reduce, reuse, and recycle. Just promote that mantra. Reduce, reuse, and recycle. What about awareness? Because, of course, a lot of people may still be unaware of these green initiatives, of these sustainability practices. So you need to educate staff on these initiatives. You need to educate staff, and that is part of what we are doing, creating awareness for these green initiatives, for us to be aware that other people have actually keyed in and they are going ahead. Okay. Then you can join green lab networks. Some of them are Irish Green Labs, Sustainable European Labs, my Green Lab Ambassador Program. So join green lab networks. The advantage is that if you join a network, if you're having, of course, when you begin to move into the green initiatives, you will have challenges. So when you meet challenges, you can talk with people who started before you. These are challenges we are having. How do we go around it? How do we solve this problem? And you rub minds with them. Of course, they carry you along. So that is the advantage, benefits of joining a network, that all of you work together and pull each other up along the way. Green certifications. Now, certifications are being talked about. Green certifications. And people are already talking about green certifications being part of accreditation requirements. Although it hasn't been stated, okay, this is going to be, but people are already talking about it. So you shouldn't be surprised if you hear tomorrow that keying into green initiatives is now a requirement for accreditation. But for now, there are certifications. Labs are getting green certifications. So you can come into a lab and you see a certificate that this laboratory is certified for as a green lab. Okay, and laboratories proudly are proud to be associated with green initiatives. And interestingly, some customers, some clients would choose laboratories that will choose green labs over non-green labs, especially clients who are environmental friendly, who care for the environment. Of course, it's not surprising that they would choose green labs over non-green labs. Okay, the benefits, tangible cost savings. When you reduce waste, reduces disposal expenses and environmental impacts, there's tangible cost savings. Is less harmful on the environment, promotes environmental awareness, changes in mindsets outside of work. So if somebody is working in a green lab, you already know the tenets of that green initiative. You know why. You know the reasons behind that. It's not expected that once you leave the laboratory, you drop all those. No, it also impacts you outside of work. So when you get home, you also continue with those green initiatives for the benefit of everybody. And it enhances the lab's brand and image with its customers. Of course, people are proud to say, I work in a green lab. Very proud. And you see it boldly displayed on laboratories saying this is a green lab, I work in a green lab. So it enhances La Lab's brand and image. However, any new thing comes with challenges. So, especially in the laboratory, you expect that there will be challenges in the laboratory. The resistance to change, fear to change. We have been doing this for a long time. This has always been how it is done. What if we do it your way? What if we do this now? Who knows what will happen? Fear of contamination with reuse of materials. Yes, this is real. People who can be afraid of this. Look, this is a lab. This is healthcare. If you recycle things now, how are we sure that these things will not be contaminated? Okay. The laboratories which started this, they also had this fear of contamination. There was one study I saw saying that yes, they had this fear, but they did a study on the use of recycled materials. So they compared it with non-recycled and they realized that their fear was not real. Okay. And this is also part of what you can gain when you network with others. So if you're having this fear, you can contact others. How did you mitigate this? How did you handle this? Finding sustainable alternatives can also be a challenge, especially for us in the laboratory. Like there are talks about replacing hazardous chemicals with less hazardous chemicals. Okay, so now for us in the laboratories which use some standard SOPs, there are particular chemicals that you have to use in that SOP. So what the fear is, if you replace that with a less hazardous chemical, are you going to have the same results? Is it going to have the same results? Okay. So finding sustainable alternatives may also be a challenge. And also green alternatives may have lower performance characteristics. There are talks about energy saving, newer model energy saving equipment. What if they they are found to have lower performance characteristics? These are just challenges, okay? Okay. So then poor awareness is also a challenge. A lot of people still don't know about green initiatives. Then the initial cost required for upfront investments in new equipment, in new infrastructure. Because if you say you want to go green now as a laboratory, you are expected to invest in an equipment, eco-friendly equipment, invest in, if you have been using plastic, you're expected to buy glass, sample bottles, buy new equipment. Of course, the initial costs can be daunting and you may not have that funding to be able to do that. So that can also be a challenge. Developing effective recycling and disposable systems for waste can be challenging, especially in resource limited settings. Because let's say now that a lab here in Nigeria, we want to start recycling plastic or start recycling paper and all that. Of course, you will need a recycling plant, and getting it is not cheap. And Nigeria, I don't think I don't and Nigeria as a whole doesn't have a strong recycling system as it stands now. So if you want to embark on it as maybe just a lab in a hospital, of course that can be quite challenging. So our time is fast spent. We need to conclude. So in this session, we have been able to talk about lab safety and biosafety principles, containment practices, equipment maintenance, and then we talked about sustainable lab practices. So in conclusion, integration of safety, biosafety, and equipment management into a cohesive system is essential for our continuous improvement. And a transition to sustainable lab practices is also a strategy. It is a strategic necessity to ensure long-term viability of healthcare systems, not just in Nigeria, but globally. Okay, so thank you for listening. These are some of my references. And I'm told that next week we are going to be talking about optimizing supply chain, inventory and procurement in lab QMS. So we'll be talking about managing reagent shortages and mitigating supply chain disruptions, implement inventory tracking for efficient resource utilization, then sustainable procurement strategies for laboratory costs, effectiveness, and reliability. So thank you very much for listening, and I don't know if we have any questions.
All right. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very insightful. So we'll need some time. We have less than 20 minutes or even way less to attend to any questions or
Hello.
observations.
Next, you can take your comments now. Comments, questions, reactions, any of that is welcome right now. In the absence of any questions, I think Dr. Bruno, I don't know if you have any housekeeping issues.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Meka, for the presentation. It has been a very insightful one. We have a very limited time to take any observations, questions. So if you have any of them, kindly come up with the questions. I'll be monitoring the chat room for any questions that will be dropped there. So we'll be waiting to hear from you. Thank you very much. All right. In the absence of any questions, we would want to thank you very much for participating in today's session. Before the next week's session, we will send you emails, and the emails will be containing some links to the lectures we've delivered from the first day of this program till today. There will be PowerPoint presentations which you'll be able to download from the link. And also you can follow up on the previous episodes or the previous webinars that have been delivered in this program via our YouTube channel. So you can just join, subscribe, and then you can go through all the videos that have been recorded. So that will be it. We hope to get back here next week, same time, 4 p.m. for our next session. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day. Bye to everybody.